Hello and welcome to our weekly live dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the chairwoman and founder of the Schiller Institute. It's June 28th, 2023, and I'm Harley Schlanger. I will be your host today. We'll take your questions and comments. You can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the YouTube chat site, and Madeline will forward them to us. Now, Helga, what I'd like to start with is I've received a number of questions about two matters that have come up in the last days. First, the events last weekend around the so-called Wagner mutiny, which got the Warhawks all excited. People would like to know what your assessment is of that. And then the second one, also from Ukraine, is what you make of the comments of Zelensky that the Russians have an active plan to blow up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And someone asked the question, are the Ukrainians and NATO that crazy that they would go and do something that dangerous? So I'll start with those two questions.
Well, I think what happened last Saturday with the mutiny of Prigozhin and the so-called Wagner group, there are obviously attempts by the West to, wishful thinking, to say this is the beginning of the end of Russia. If you listen to the commentators on Saturday and even after that, it was unbelievable. There was a almost unisono prescription that, Russia is now going into a collapse and this is the beginning of the end of Putin. Well, if you look at it more realistically, I think General Kuyat, the former head of the German Bundeswehr, was much more to the point. He said this was a limited mutiny. It has been brought under control. And if you listen to what President Putin said in two major speeches since, he basically did not rule out, and other officials of Russia did not rule out, that it was instigated by Western intelligence. It is very ominous that they claim, especially US intelligence claim, that they knew about it several days ahead. Now, obviously, they did not even inform their NATO partners. This is really playing with fire. And obviously this comes in the context of a situation where the Ukraine counteroffensive is not proceeding well. That in general, we have reached a point where the Russians are not the Russians, but Professor Karaganov, who is an analyst and quite respected by certain circles in Russia and elsewhere, he had put out this incredible warning, or actually a suggestion, that because the West has lost all fear of nuclear weapons, that Russia should use a preemptive nuclear weapon somewhere against Western Europe, presumably, and that would be a warning shot, so that people would take the terror of nuclear weapons serious again. Now, that was dismissed by some other analysts from the same institution in Russia, but that shows you the kind of point of potential no return we have reached. And I think the head of the Carnegie Foundation in Moscow, Dmitry Trenin, he put out a very interesting article by basically, discussing the same thing, but not with the idea of actually using nuclear weapons. But he said it is a fact that the Western elites, because of decade-long of propaganda, which they obviously believe themselves by now, have basically lost the fear of nuclear weapons leading to the Armageddon, and that this is extremely dangerous. And I think that is really what we are looking at, because, once you reach a point where conventionally Russia cannot be defeated in Ukraine, which has been set out as the goal of NATO from the beginning, and then the temptation is, to somehow bring it to a different level. I mean, this was mentioned already, I think, April 22 by the RUSI, the Royal United Service Institute in London, which is linked to the British monarchy, a think tank. They had basically said that one needs to create a Cuban Missile Crisis on steroid by encouraging Ukraine to retake Crimea. That naturally would be the absolute red line for Russia, and then you would have a Cuban crisis on steroids, and that would be then the possibility to negotiate. Now that is a brinkmanship with Armageddon. This is completely insane. So I think that is the general environment in which this whole war has come to. And naturally, you know, there is this whole talk about that Russia would blow up the nuclear plant, and that would basically, you know, then be, I mean, several serious analysts have warned that this is a red flag, a false flag. Can we start this whole thing again? Oh, I'm sorry, I misspelled. I mean, naturally, a false flag and not a red flag. I'm apologizing. Okay, so you know, so this is extremely dangerous, and I think that, you know, it just shows the absolute need that we have to go into a completely different way of thinking, because, you know, we are on the edge of nuclear war, and if people would actually know how close we are, you know, they would really be in the streets en masse.
Now, we have some questions that directly get to what you were just talking about. Olivia from Romania starts by saying, great job on providing people with information and a different perspective. But she says, as a citizen of an Eastern European country, I follow with great worry what's happening now in the Ukraine war. She asks about the constant lying coming from the West. And she says, what can we do in this situation? Elections in most Western countries don't take place until 2024. What can we do? And I'll add to that a second question that came in. How is the mobilization going around the International Peace Coalition? Are you getting responses on the level necessary?
Well, I think, you know, I think I should add one element to the strategic picture, because, you know, on the one side, it is on the edge of World War III, and we should not be complacent about that one iota. On the other side, I think it's also important that we understand, and that you understand, that the reason why this war danger is becoming so acute is because there's also a completely new system emerging. We discussed this in the past several times, that the new paradigm represented by the BRICS countries and many countries of the global south, who are moving towards a new world economic order, towards a new financial system, a new currency, that is also progressing very clearly, because the countries of the global south do not want to continue the colonial suppression which the neoliberal system had imposed on them, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union, you know, where some people in the West thought that an unipolar world could be imposed on the world. Now that unipolar world is clearly no longer existent, and we are experiencing, in a certain sense, the birth pain of the new system, which is not yet settled. But it is not hopeless. So I think, you know, also the fact that in the United States you have a change in the situation. You have now on the Republican side with Trump, despite all of his legal troubles and, you know, other difficulties, he is against the war. And he is potentially a voice on the Republican side to end this. He has promised that repeatedly. And on the Democratic side, with the speech of Robert Kennedy in New Hampshire, evoking the spirit of his uncle, the American University speech, a peace candidate on the Democratic side, and naturally then you have the wide political spectrum of independents and other political parties which are emerging in a much bigger way than it used to be possible in the United States. So the situation is very complex. I agree. The next 1.5 years until the US election will be probably the most dangerous period in the history of mankind ever. But it is not hopeless. It is, you have rational people in leading positions in many governments. You have leaders in the global south who really show that they have leadership qualities. So we are not in a hopeless situation where the whole world would be in the hands of just reckless political leaders. But it does require a stronger, much stronger mobilization of the population. And I can say that we had 3 meetings of the International Peace Coalition coming together in a very good way. I mean, we have leading individuals, but we have also several organizations. You can go to the website of the Schiller Institute and look at the press releases we put out after each session, so you can see which groups and people have joined it. And we are absolutely determined to make it grow. People have now made a commitment that they will bring in more groups and people. So it's a growing event, but I can only urge all of you who are listening or watching this program, you should join it. You should help, because we need to have actions. We have plans now to mobilize in the next several weeks to have a big event on the 6th of October, maybe in several places around the world. This is the day of the Hiroshima bombing. A bombing which was completely unnecessary. I mean, this is now documented 100% that Japan had already capitulated. There were already negotiations with Cardinal Montini. And, so it was only a demonstration of shock and awe, to demonstrate the kind of Schrecklichkeit at that time against the Soviet Union. And that experience really should be re-evoked, because that's what we are looking at potentially on a much larger scale, up to the complete elimination of life on the planet. So I think what you can do is get in contact with the Schiller Institute, get in contact with the International Peace Coalition. It is growing. We have more people in Latin America, North America, Europe, even some places in Asia and Africa are now joining. So that is what, we have to make so strong that it does impact the powers to be, or better, the, mainstream people who are influenced by the mainstream media, because they need to have that voice heard very strongly. So that's what you should do. Join with us.
Helga, just one correction. You said October 6th. It's August 6th. We'll be having the demonstrations around the Hiroshima commemoration. There's a question from the founder and president of the Multicultural Workers Forum, I believe from Eritrea, Mardokai Rusom. And what he asks is the contrast between countries like Eritrea, which he said have been under sanctions and threats from the Western establishment, and yet they're transitioning into a multipolar order. What about countries that at this point are under enormous economic colonialism, facing challenges, and have not yet made that change, made that shift? Is there some mechanism by which they can join the new paradigm that's being developed?
Well, I think I don't have a blueprint answer to that question, but there are tremendous changing taking place. You have, on the one side, the BRICS process. According to the government of South Africa, more than 30 countries have applied to join the BRICS, and several of them will join at the upcoming BRICS summit, I think in South Africa in August. Then you have the whole dynamic, basically, of creating a new currency, basically without monetarist values, but based on physical values. Trade is being done in national currencies. I would suggest that, if you have any kind of way of, reaching into diplomatic connections, in Africa, a lot of things are happening in the Middle East or Southwest Asia equally. After the mediation by China between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the entire region is changing. Similarly, you have the leadership of President Lula, who is creating a peace group, and several African countries also are offering to mediate in the Ukraine crisis. So there are many, many initiatives, and I can only say that this is something where you have to look out for those countries who are willing to go into a new system and basically try to establish contact with them. And if you want, contact us and we can maybe do something together.
So this is Helga Zepp-LaRouche you're listening to, the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. We have time for more questions. You can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org. I have a few more questions for you, a couple of I think you'll be quite interested in. Thomas asks, is it now the case, it looks like China is speaking out more strongly about the pressures from Anglo-American hegemony. Do you think we'll see more leaders from Asia and Africa and South America speaking more strongly and loudly to the Anglo-Americans?
Yes, that is happening. After so many decades of colonial suppression and coups and manipulations and wars which were based on lies, the Iraq War, everybody knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction. Madeleine Albright saying 500,000 children of Iraq following the sanctions, that was worth it. I mean, if you think about what has happened in the last decades, and that people are not as, forgotten about events as some of them think we are in Western Europe, but in the developing countries, it is my experience, people have a long memory, and there is an accumulative recognizing of what the policies of the globalist countries were. And I think now we see that there is a general attitude, we don't take this anymore. For example, if you look at China, after Secretary of State Blinken had canceled his trip to China, claiming that the balloon incident, that this was a spy balloon by China, then China denied that in any case. So after some months, Blinken goes to China and he says, okay, let's remedy the relations. And while he's still in China, President Biden says, China, Xi Jinping is a dictator, which naturally caused a big uproar in China. And then Blinken confirmed it. He says he agrees with everything Biden says. So, I think that there is really a discrepancy, a gap, because the countries of the global south have the idea enough is enough. And many countries or many politicians in the West still think they can do whatever they want and there will be never a response because they are the top ones and the best ones and the beautiful ones and the smart ones. But that is no longer the case. And I think that there is right now a much, much stronger determination by the leaders of the South to basically say, we do not want to hear your Sunday sermons. We want to have real development. We want to have infrastructure, ports, streets, highways. So I think we are experiencing right now a very important, change. And, you can actually see who is offering what. the Africans are generally saying, if you talk to the Europeans, you get a Sunday speech, but if you talk to China, you get a port or you get a railway. And I think that is really the difference. And I think the more people are speaking out, the better. But I still think we need to move the whole discussion on a new paradigm, a higher order, because we are in a period of change, where the tendency would be very quickly to say, let these other people go to hell, we do our own thing. But the big danger right now is that the world falls into two completely separate blocks, and that would also have the danger of a world war. So we have to think about a comprehensive order which takes into account the interest of every single nation of the world. I think China is the only country which has made a proposal in this direction. Xi Jinping always talks about the shared future of humanity. He has proposed a global security initiative, a global development initiative, and a global civilizational initiative, which together makes a package for a comprehensive new plan for all nations to work together based on their sovereignty and their respect for each other. Now, the Schiller Institute, is promoting this idea, especially since the war in Ukraine broke out, the idea that we need a new security and development architecture, which is in great affinity what China is saying. It's not the same because naturally our proposal is, coming from a Western philosophical conception, the idea that there is a natural law which is built in the physical universe. There is a lawfulness to which you can refer and on which you can rely. But it's going in a similar direction. There are many points of affinity between Confucian thinking and Western humanist thinking. And we have to lift the whole discussion on that level, because if we only remain on the level of poking each other's eye, then the destruction of civilization is a guarantee. And I think human beings have been created for something better. So that's what we should pursue.
Now, here's a question from someone who signed it, An Awakened German. They write, the collapse of the coalition government parties in Germany in the polls, is this occurring as the effects of the war and the energy shortages are beginning to affect the average German citizen? And do you think this will lead to a change in the government policy?
Well, I think there is a considerable panic in the so-called established parties right now, because the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, is in the polls now, I think about 20%, and the second largest party in the country. And, naturally, there are people in the AfD who are very reasonable, but there are also some elements which are not so reasonable, and this is why this is a problem. I think this is the result of, the fact that the present coalition government has completely given up any pretext that Germany is a sovereign country. As a matter of fact, the whole world is laughing about Germany. They blow up Nord Stream pipelines. What does the government do? Nothing. It takes the Hungarian foreign minister, I can't pronounce his name very well, it's something like Sihato, and he just raised it. He said the attack on Nord Stream was an attack on the sovereignty of all of Europe. Why is there no investigation? I have gotten many responses from people all over the world who say that the German government is a laughingstock. Scholz, the chancellor, can only say, we do everything gemeinsam, we do everything together, with Biden standing there besides him at the press conference. Right now, Germany is deindustrializing. I mean, 16% of oil firms have left already to invest either in the United States or in China because of the unpayable energy prices. 30% more consider to do that. You know what that means? That means Germany is going to half in terms of industry. It's being deindustrialized at a rate People can't pay things. I mean, there is a complete collapse already, which is much bigger than the official figures reveal. If you talk to people, first of all, they're closing small hospitals all over the place. If you need an expert medical view, you have to wait in almost every field more than half a year if you are a normal patient, having not a private insurance, but just being a public insurance. Half a year. If you are sick, too bad, wait half a year. So these are the hidden results of a collapsing society already. And I think we will see an upheaval, and the more quickly this government, this so-called streetlight coalition government, the more quickly they are being chased out of office, the better, because they are not only not taking care of the interests of the population, they are like a caretaker government for NATO or for the United States or for the British for that matter, but they are not representing the interest of the German people. And I think this will lead to an explosion. I think the figures in the polls of the AfD, it's just the beginning of an earthquake, which will, if you don't go in an orderly transition where the interest of the German industry would be to ally with the global South. And I think when the Chinese Premier Li was just in Germany having intergovernmental coalition talks, between China and Germany, he said, put the industry in the driver's seat. They understand much better what the interest is of Germany than the media or the intelligence services. And I can only full-heartedly support that idea, but we need to have a conception where to go. And this is what I said before. We need a completely new system.
Well, I think it'd be worthwhile for people to go onto the Schiller website and get the 10 fundamental principles that you wrote that should be at the basis of moving into this new paradigm, this higher order. Helga, I have a comment that you may want to comment on, although it's sort of self-evident, and then a couple more questions. The comment is, isn't it ironic that Putin is called weak because he didn't kill the so-called mutineers? Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, it's wishful thinking, I mean, obviously the situation is serious, and what Putin said in his recent speech in front of the cathedral, with the security forces, whom he thanked that they avoided a slide into chaos. I mean, obviously, if there would have been a support for the mutiny, you could have had a complete collapse into uncontrollable situation. So that potential was there, but as the reaction by the different security forces showed, I mean, not even the Wagner group completely supported Prigozhin. And, however, once you start these kinds of things, I mean, I don't want to play now into scenarios and make wild stories, but, what do you think would happen if in the United States some incident would occur? The United States is highly polarized. You have militias armed to the teeth. You could imagine something which happened in the United States which would go in a similar direction. So to play with these things is just completely insane. And I think it's very good that Putin was able to diffuse the situation quickly. And I think it's wishful thinking. I mean, the idea to split Russia into 10 or 12 parts, the strongest nuclear power, are people completely mad? Don't they realize that if you go into a chaos, terrorists could get hold of nuclear weapons? And then what? You would not have any more a rational partner in negotiations like you have it with Putin, who, in my view, is a man of remarkable patience. How many leaders in the West would have the patience of a Putin? And, if you play on the dissolution of Russia, you are playing with the fate of humanity. Because if you throw Russia into chaos, you have no idea who would take control. And it may be somebody against Putin looks like a, peacenik and a very friendly person. And the people in the West who are playing these games are completely reckless.
Here's a question from Tanya from Canada, who talks about how Trudeau has made a total commitment, the Prime Minister of Canada, a total commitment to support Ukraine. There are no opposition parties that will speak out against NATO or even against the flagrant Nazism rampant in corrupt Ukraine. In Canada, there's more censorship, trying to silence voices from speaking out. And what Tanya asks is if we would invite the one political party leader in Canada who's refusing to fly the Ukrainian flag and push for war with Russia, Mr. Maxime Bernier, who I don't know, but I'm sure we can find out who he is. Would we invite him to be part of our dialogue?
Well, I'm perfectly happy to investigate who that person is. I don't know his name either, but if he is a serious advocate of peace, absolutely, because, we need a peace movement stronger in the public opinion than the war machine. And we want to expand the International Peace Coalition to every single country on the planet. So please send me information about this person and we will invite him. And you should absolutely be part of this effort as well.
Yes, Tanya, this is work for you. You should contact him and then get him in touch with us and get us in touch with him. All right, here's a final question, Helga, from someone who said that outside of the Schiller Institute and the gray zone, it's very hard to get accurate information about what's really happening. And they mention that Putin showed a signed agreement that was signed by the Ukrainians and the Russians in March 2022. He showed that to the African leaders who came to visit. Why won't the press cover this or demand a response from the State Department in the United States or NATO countries? How can we break out this story?
Well, that's a very good question. You would think that, after Putin showed these documents to these African leaders, that there was a peace agreement. It was signed by, on an initial level by both sides, both Ukrainian and Russians. It was ready to go to end this war. And then comes Boris Johnson and says, no, NATO insists that the war continues. And later, recently this was repeated by Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, again saying the war must continue. I would think that if you would have normal governments, functioning governments, responsible governments who would stick to the oaths they have given to their populations, like in Germany, when you become chancellor or minister, you have to make an oath that you will, work for the well-being of the people and protect them against damage. That anybody who has made such an oath would immediately say, look, this is outrageous. We have to, make a public investigation, a hearing, even a legal suit, to push for a war of aggression. Isn't that a crime? Well, the fact that these governments are not doing that means they are no good. They are absolutely no good. And therefore we should replace them. So we should, really draw the conclusion out of this that if you leave your fate to these institutions, you have no guarantee what they will do, because they have proven again and again that they are not taking care of the common good of the people. So I think we have reached an unbelievable point, and the longer this takes, the longer this kind of absolute disrespect for the interest of the people continues, the bigger the explosion will be. So therefore join with us, because we are trying to get an orderly reorganization before it is too late. And, given the fact that the Schiller Institute and our forces are working on that for a very long time, we do have allies in many countries of the world, and we need a platform of rationality, people who are determined to, really have a world order where people can work together and not have the idea that a small group of oligarchs is running the world by making profit out of the war machine.
Well, Helga, in conclusion, let me say this is an extremely dense and complicated moment in history. And I think you've covered a lot of topics. I just want to know if there's anything you'd like to add in summary now.
Well, all I can say is, that if you look at the danger, the existence of civilization is at stake. We could lose the whole humanity. If it comes to nuclear war, it's it. There is no life left, not even a journalist or historian to investigate what went wrong. And that's the danger. And people have, there were several articles by, I mentioned Dimitri Trenin and others who said the problem is the Western elites have lost the fear of Armageddon and, the fear of nuclear weapons. And they're playing with these things as if it would be okay just to throw a little preemptive nuclear plant on Poland. That will not lead to World War III. That's foolishness. And I think we need a population who basically understands there is nobody who will take care of yourself if you don't do it yourself. So again, work with us, and there are options. The potential to have a new world economic order is bigger than ever before, but it does require state citizens. So become an adult and work with us.
Well, Helga, thank you for joining us today. As always, it's important to get your input because it's very clear that you have an intention that is thought out over many years, worked out with your husband, Lyndon LaRouche, over many years. And again, people can go to the fundamental principles that you drafted as a way of developing how to think critically in dealing with this crisis. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Till next week.